Very good. All right. Well, I might kick off and more people can join and just catch up as they go. As Brad mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded, so you can view it back if you've missed the start. And also we ask that you obviously keep your microphones on mute and feel free to post questions throughout, but we'll only be answering them after the short presentations from each of the panelists. So welcome to our Q&A panel session, which is on the back of the story of plastic film and also to wrap up Plastic Free July. I'm Hayley. I'm our sustainability advisor, engagement advisor from RMIT University, and we're hosting the session today, and we'll be joined by a panel who I'll introduce in just a sec. But before I do that, just like to do a quick acknowledgement of country. And although we're not at the RMIT University campus, we do acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. We also acknowledge their ancestors and elders past and present, and acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. And more locally, I live in Coburg, so everyone's dialing in from different areas, but our house backs onto Merry Creek. So this belonged to the Wurundjeri speaking Wurundjeri Willam clan, and that actually means white gum tree. So really, I'm really proud to be living at such a beautiful spot and to share that landscape. So the story of plastic. If you haven't had a chance to view the film, that's okay. You've got viewing rights now until the 3rd of August. So make sure you catch up over the weekend if you haven't already. And that is a limited edition screening, so please make sure you're tuning into that one. But I think it was a really great documentary, really well put together, a really hard topic to address, but they had all the right people in the room. And I think it was told in a really compelling way, and I definitely walked away with some really strong messages. And one of them being 91%. So I'm sure a few of you know what this means, but essentially all of the plastic produced in the world, 91% of it hasn't been recycled. And that is a whopping number. And I think our panelists will go into this as well in a bit more detail, but of that, 9% is recycled, and only 2% of that 9% is recycled effectively. So that's meaning that everything else is either being incinerated, it's going into landfill, or it's staying in our environment, as you can see here. And Australia is not without its own problems. I'm sure you've all seen pictures like this. When we had the export ban to China of scrap plastics, we've seen issues occurring like this. So it really is an issue we need to deal with at a local level. And there needs to be a lot more responsibility coming from the original producers of either the packaging or the plastic themselves. So that's just a little taste for the movie if you haven't seen it, and a flavour for the discussion we'll be having today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panellists. We've got Jeremy Brown, who's the co-founder and managing director of Ocean Protect. We've also got Brad, who is their principal environmental engineer. And we've got Dr. Rebecca Van Amber from RMIT, who's from the School of Fashion and Textiles. And we're really interested to hear their points of view as they talk about different areas of the plastic problem. So that's all from me for now. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to the guys.
Cool. Thanks very much for that, Hayley. I'm just going to try and share my screen, so apologies if it's a little bit slow, but hopefully this works okay. Now, please, Hayley, let me know if this is looking a bit dodgy, but hopefully this comes up okay. So you're seeing just, I'll just swap the views. So you guys seeing just one screen, are you?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, look, as Hayley so beautifully introduced, myself and Jeremy from Ocean Protect, and we're pretty excited to talk to you guys today. And obviously it's been a long day for everyone involved. So we're catching guys, probably you guys have been working hard or studying hard, and obviously there's a whole bunch of COVID drama. So I think to kick things off, let's just start off with a big, deep breath. So everyone on 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, deep breath in and out. So I'm not sure if you guys realize, but 50 to 85% of the oxygen that you've just breathed comes directly from our oceans. So we get so much out of our oceans, you know, food, recreations, aesthetic, you know, climate control, etc. We rely heavily on the health of our oceans. But the reality is we actually don't do a very good job of protecting that ocean. And a key pressure impacting on the health of our oceans, as depicted in the movie, is the amount of plastic in our oceans. So one thing we did at the start of last year, this is Ocean Protect, we actually were keen to get a better understanding as to the understanding of the Australian publics in relation to the issue of ocean plastic. So we commissioned an independent survey. So we set the questions, and we got an independent group to essentially ask 1,000 Australians from all over the country, all different demographics, and we asked them a bunch of questions. And one of the key questions we asked was, okay, plastic's a big problem, but where's it coming from? So, and obviously this is a question for you guys as well. And it's worth pointing out, you can put your questions in the Q&A, which we'll obviously come to a little bit later. But yeah, I'm keen to know what you guys think. So what do you guys think is the biggest source of plastic pollution from these 4, I guess, transport mechanisms? So is it litter and debris released at sea, like commercial fishing nets? Is it sewage, like as in like microplastics from our laundry and bathroom and toilets? Is it stormwater, or is it litter at the beach? So I can't see your answers, but I'm going to assume you've locked them in. But this is what the Australian public in the survey results showed. So essentially, it's a real mix. So about 30% thought it was litter and debris released at sea. About 27% thought of sewage. 18% thought it was littering at the beach, and about a quarter thought stormwater.
It's a pretty even mix here, isn't it, Brad? It's quite surprising that people think it comes from so many different places. So without any further ado, Brad, where does the majority of it come from?
Yeah, look, the reality is scientific research shows that roughly about 80% of all the plastic in our oceans comes from land-based sources. And the key mechanism as to how that plastic gets there is stormwater runoff. So when rain falls on the ground and on your car parks, on your roads, on your other sort of hard stand areas, that rain is basically washes into our stormwater pits and pipes and drains and creeks, and ultimately into our oceans and rivers. So you go, Jeremy.
This report out of Eunomia is a really interesting one, because there's a lot of emphasis out on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. There's a lot of emphasis on pollution that's floating at the top of our ocean, but this report actually details that roughly about 94% of the plastic that we're seeing is going to the bottom of the ocean. So just visualize that when you're seeing everything from the documentaries and the story of plastic, what you're seeing on top of the ocean is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, good point. And the other key thing to take away from this is a lot of focus on microplastics. And don't get me wrong, microplastics are a big issue, but they're actually a relatively small portion of the overall plastic load entering our oceans. Microplastics, by definition, is anything less than 5 millimeters. But yeah, the majority of the plastic entering our oceans is essentially bigger than 5 millimeters, so bigger than a cigarette butt. And again, the vast majority of that plastic in our oceans is coming from land-based sources. And look, Jeremy and myself are very familiar with this issue. So Ocean Protect as a company, essentially how we make our money is we put in stormwater treatment assets like this to capture pollution. So we put these in and manage or maintain these assets. And so this is just one example of a what we call a gross pollutant trap. These are like big underground garbage bins within our stormwater networks, and you can see here, this is if you lifted the access lid of one of these, this is what you'd often see. And this is a common site. Here's another one. So you often see a whole bunch of plastic. So these are big chambers, and you often see a whole bunch of floating plastic at the surface, but there's a whole bunch of other real gunky sort of stuff at the bottom as well. And this is a common site. But the reality is the vast majority of our urban areas don't have these assets in place. And where they are in place, they rarely get maintained. It's crazy. So there's so much effort, like Jeremy indicated, around cleaning up the ocean plastic, whether it be the Ocean Cleanup Initiative by Boyne Slat or various sort of beach cleanup activities. But the reality is a whole bunch of these assets are underground. We think probably tens of thousands of assets across Australia are in the ground like this, but they are essentially full to the brim. They rarely get maintained. So essentially incoming pollution just bypasses them. And they can be big ones like this one, or little ones like this sort of individual gully basket. So this is basically a little small gully basket sitting in a roadside gully pit. And it's really good at capturing pollution. But the reality is if this doesn't get cleaned out, incoming pollution will just basically bypass and go straight downstream into the pipe, into the creek or river, and ultimately into the ocean.
And I think that's a really good point to hit on. We've got to understand how rain mobilises pollution. So it doesn't matter if you're by the coast or you're out in Western Sydney or Western Melbourne or Western Brisbane, wherever you are, what you see that's on the ground, when you have a large rain event, that the water, the energy of the water, it mobilises the pollution and sends it down the gully pit, down into our local creek, rivers, and ultimately the oceans. So if you imagine how big the cities are when it rains, and look, I'm in Sydney at the moment, we've had a huge amount of rain over the last few days, and the amount of pollution that you can visibly see, that's just on the surface, is from stormwater runoff. So it's really important to note that it's not just by the coast. No matter where you are, we created amazing drainage systems hundreds of years ago to get the water off our cities to stop them flooding. We didn't really quite think about, us as humans, we're messy people. We litter accidentally or on purpose. We essentially come out to, look at our urbanisation and how, our car tyres, the fumes from our cars go up and down. All of that washes off our city, down into our creeks, rivers, and ends up in our oceans.
Yeah, look, it's a big issue. But do you think people care? Like, obviously, we've got a whole bunch of people dialing into this webinar, and obviously they really care about the plight of our planet and particularly the oceans. But do you really think the Australian public really care too much about the health of our oceans and waterways? And to be honest, this is a question we asked. So this is one of the questions we asked in our survey at the start of last year. And we basically said, okay, with increasing population growth in Australia, what impacts are you most concerned about? And we gave them these issues, housing density, jobs, traffic, waste management, marine and waterway health, air quality, car parking, house prices, public safety, water supply. And generally when we go around and ask this question to the people that we often present to, we ask them, okay, what do you think would be the number one concern of the Australian public? And I'll ask you the same question, but look, I'm sure you're saying probably, traffic.
It has to be traffic, mate.
Yeah, or jobs. We're all out of job, out of work. And then we sort of say, okay, well, where do you think marine and waterway health would be on this list? Is it halfway? Is it near the top? Is it down? Basically, we generally get told, oh yeah, it's either the last on that list or at least near the bottom. Okay, but what I'm going to do now is show you the results of the survey. So I'll show you the lowest concerns to the highest concerns. So the lowest concern was character and new housing. Second was car parking. Traffic's only about a fourth from the top. The number one concern of the survey respondents was marine and waterway health. The number one concern was marine and waterway health. And we're not just surveying Jeremy and myself and our mums and dads and brothers and sisters and other sort of environmental sort of hippies or whatever. This is a randomized survey, all demographics across Australia, all different locations. And we generally get accused, okay, you made it up. You fudged the numbers.
Well, that's it, mate. Let's be honest. We actually copied this from a report that was done in 2010, I believe, essentially asking the same question. The Queensland government did. They asked the exact same question nearly 10 years ago. Brad, you want to put up the answer?
Yeah, look again. Yeah, same question. We copied this summit survey. This is a much bigger survey, 2,500 people thereabouts across southeast Queensland. And again, the number one concern was marine and waterway health. But they gave more options. Yes, you go.
Yeah, so what's that really telling us? That we obviously care deeply about our oceans. I mean, what is it? 85% of us live within 10K of the coast. But what it says to us is there's votes in this. Politicians need to listen to us. And it's very important, and we'll get to this, the power of social media, the power of webinars, the power of talking about this stuff. It's actually starting a movement. So it is really important to understand, to be passionate, to be about these issues, because we can put pressure on local governments then to really make change.
And look, there's a number of things impacting on the health of our marine environment, waterways, but plastic and litter pollution is a key one, like I said at the start. And this is another survey done by Healthy Land and Water and Queensland University of Technology in 2018. And they asked a number of people, again, randomized survey, what are your top environmental concerns? And again, the number one concern was litter pollution. And this is irrelevant whether you classify yourself as a greenie or a non-greenie. Both groups actually said their number one bugbear, their top concern was litter pollution. And that's understandable. Like, you see litter on the ground, it annoys you. It's frustrating. You want to see change.
We like to say it's our gateway pollutant, because look, we've been in stormwater for a long time. We've seen, everything you can see go down a stormwater drain. But everyone understands litter, whether it's a Coke can, whether it's a chip packet, everyone understands that. So when they see that in the marine environment, they go, gee, how did it get there?
Yeah, look, and it's no surprise. We live in the age of social media where people can see the various images from all around the world about the impact that plastic and litter has on our marine environment. And obviously, there's a whole bunch of documentaries, such as The Story of Plastic, which a lot of people would have watched just recently. But that's just one of a stack that are generally freely available on the internet or Netflix. And then you said the news articles, the fact that they're finding not just plastic in our marine species, but actually us. They think roughly, the scientists reckon on average, the average human consumes about a credit card worth of plastic every week.
That's astonishing. But look, just going back to Daryl Blatchley, I think he was in the Philippines. Daryl Blatchley, that's him, the bottom of the screen, pulling out 40 kgs worth of plastic. Now, we actually were lucky enough to do a podcast with Daryl. That's not his first whale. I think he's done a necropsy, which is basically an autopsy on a whale. I think he's done something like 120 necropsies. All of them are basically suffocated, because what they do is they go and eat the plastic forms up in their stomachs. Then when they try and eat the krill or whatever, they can't actually get that nutrients out of them. So these poor whales are basically going around starving, but they have to try and dive deeper. And when they try and dive deeper, using up more and more energy, these whales are suffering for long periods of time before they actually die.
And it's not just about whales in the Philippines or turtles in Indonesia. It's even on our doorstep. So this is an article from the Brisbane Times, my local rag, highlighting the amount of plastic in turtles in Moreton Bay. So this is a University of Sunshine Coast lecturer indicating that of the dead turtles she sees in Moreton Bay, about 30% were full of plastic. So 30% of dead turtles found in Moreton Bay are basically dying as a direct result of plastic ingestion. That's crazy. But obviously, there's a whole bunch of educational campaigns around, the plight of our oceans and trying to get people to reduce the amount of plastic that people use. But look, ultimately, there's a few key factors, particularly in Australia, contributing to this problem. Number one is, as Jeremy indicated, we're generally a messy lot. There's a lot of litter coming out of or being deposited in our urban environments. And like I said a little while ago, at least 90% of our urban areas have no stormwater treatment assets whatsoever. So if rain falls on the ground and washes into a drain, it generally goes without any treatment straight into a creek or a river or ocean or a bay. But even where we do have these assets in the ground, they don't get maintained. So to give an example, this is what we pulled out of just 8 little gully baskets in a typical road in Western Sydney.
When I say we, I didn't see Brad there. That was actually myself and a couple of other guys from the Sydney office. Now, just to put this into perspective, that's 8 gully pits just on the random service centre. In the city of Sydney, which is quite a small area where I live, in town, there's 14,500 gully pits in one small area. We estimate there's millions of these gully pits all around Australia. That's just 8 gully baskets, and we've been back since. That is an astonishing amount of pollution. Without those assets in place and without adequately maintaining them, again, it will go to our creeks, rivers and oceans.
But look, Ocean Protect, we are, I guess, a for-profit social enterprise, and essentially, whilst we do make money out of, selling and maintaining the stormwater treatment assets, we're basically spending a whole bunch of money, essentially advocating for change. We teamed up at the start of last year with 5 small grassroots organisations trying to support them. We've actually got our own podcast, would you believe, which actually every week we have a new guest and talk about various issues facing the ocean, particularly plastic pollution, trying to get the message out there. Jeremy's often on TV, like this one on Channel 7, talking about the plight of our marine environment and how important stormwater is. And the bottom right picture there, now this is a bit different. Jeremy and myself filmed a very small movie at the start of last year.
Well. Let's put this out there. Look, Brad obviously was really into it. He thinks of himself as an avid actor, But what's really bad about it, well, really creepy about it, is if you go back, this is pre-COVID. So if anyone wants to go, if you Google toxic Ocean Protect, literally it was all masks and it was all about the end of the world because of plastic. So go check it out. We're trying to push the boundaries and get out there and tell the story better. What we haven't done as an industry, in the stormwater industry, is connect ocean pollution with stormwater runoff. And by going out and doing some of these things, like our podcast, getting on TV, getting out to the community, it's really like pulling up our industry to go, well, hold on, where does this pollution come from? So check it out.
And look, it's not just about stormwater treatment. Like, we are very much advocating for what we call the waste management hierarchy. So the number one, the most effective, the cheapest is essentially avoiding plastic usage or littering in the first place. So, and next step down is reducing and reusing. Next step down is recycling. Yeah, after that, stormwater treatment. And down the bottom, the most expensive, the least effective is cleaning up. It's far more effective to focus on these sort of higher steps in the waste management hierarchy, particularly avoiding. But what we see in the media is there's a lot of attention around cleanup. And again, it's the most expensive, least effective.
Well, and to the point, an analogy that we always use, and people may have heard it. So you go home tonight, you get off this fantastic webinar, you get home, you want to go and have a bath. You find you go up to your bathroom and water's overflowing, water's everywhere, you got wet feet, it's going down the stairs. What's the first thing that you do? Do you go get a mop in the bucket, or do you go turn the tap off? And what we're trying to do is turn the tap off and stop the pollution even getting into our marine environment.
Yeah, and look, from a stormwater perspective, we know that we've got a commercial interest in this. Sorry, my computer's just frozen for a smidgen. So, sorry, just give me a sec. So we know we've got a commercial interest in terms of the stormwater management side of things. But look, we are a small company, and we're just one of many that would essentially benefit from essentially better stormwater management practices and a reduced usage and reliance on plastic in our urban environment. And look, one thing that we've done just recently is we're essentially advocating for a zero litter to ocean target in Australia. So this is essentially saying to Australia, look, it's not just a problem coming out of Asia. Roughly in Australia, we discharge into Australian waterways about 1.5 tons an hour of plastic into Australian oceans, and that is from Australia. So before we go point the finger at Indonesia or whoever, we need to stop the litter pollution coming out of our own sort of land. And so we're basically promoting essentially this target. It involves a whole bunch of different actions to essentially stop litter from discharging into Australian waterways, and in the process create a whole bunch of jobs for the Australian public, which is obviously pretty important in light of the recent COVID dramas. So basically, we always had a plastic plan that we were taking to the government, and we were always, really trying to advocate for stopping plastic going, into our marine waterways. And we were sitting there during COVID, and we were like, well, hold on, what can we do? And we started to run the numbers and started to collaborate with a bunch of people.
and to really go out and say, well, hey, what can we do? So we estimate we can employ about 7,500 people over a 10-year period. These are people that have lost their jobs to the recent COVID pandemic, people that can be trained up to get out into the community and clean up their local waterways. So great stimulus. 2, we can stop over 600 wheelie bins of entering into our oceans on a daily basis. And look, guys, that's grossly underestimated. You know, we just don't actually have enough data to actually be correct there, but that's grossly underestimated. And look, is it going to cost money? Yeah, it's going to cost a bunch of cash. We estimate over $5 billion over a 10-year period. But when you think about that, I mean, what's a motorway? What's a tunnel to stop traffic congestion? That's $500 million over every year over a 10-year period. And then we could be the first country in the world to be a zero litter to ocean country. Great, get the tourists back, come and enjoy our wonderful beaches.
And people might be thinking, oh yeah, nice idea. It's too far-fetched. But the reality is we've actually copied the idea from elsewhere. So the state of California in 2009 set exactly the same target, zero trash to waterways by 2030. And that's a massive population, big area, and they're on track to achieve that. Similarly, San Francisco Bay, they're targeting it by 2022. Again, big area. In Canada, they've got their own plastics charter. And even in Indonesia, they've set a goal by 2040 that Indonesia will be entirely plastic pollution free. But look, we've focused our advocacy efforts in Australia, and we've actually been very successful. So Jeremy and myself have gone around to a whole bunch of different councils across Australia. And look, the first council to commit to a zero trash to waterways target is the city of Ryde in Sydney. So that's a big, a decent sized population, 116,000, and it's the first council in Australia. And then once Ryde committed, Burwood Council committed in Sydney as well. And then when Burwood committed, then City of Sydney committed. And following from that, not to be outdone in little old Queensland, my old hometown, the Noosa Shire has recently committed in their draft Noosa River Plan to achieve this target by 2030. So look, if you're interested in knowing more about this zero litter to ocean target, jump on the website, zerolittertoocean.com. Have a check out the policy paper. There's a whole bunch of groups that are behind that, behind this target, including a whole bunch of councils, including Brisbane City Council, Noosa, Fraser Coast, Shoalhaven Council, etc., Port Macquarie, and a whole bunch of NGOs like Sea Shepherd and Ocean Impact and Keep Australia Beautiful, and a whole bunch of private industry. But if you're keen to know more about it, download it from our website. But look, I think the key thing from my perspective is the plastic pollution problem is a big and scary problem. And you often see these documentaries like Story of Plastic, and it is quite depressing. But from my perspective, this is a problem that we actually can solve. I really have significant confidence that the human population are a pretty ingenious lot, and when they recognise that they've got an issue, they can actually drive significant change. And this is one problem that we actually can solve readily.
Yeah, and look, just to finish this up, what I would say in regards to zero litter to ocean, be active. Go down to your local council, write to them and say, look, what are you guys doing about it? When Brad said before we went around a bunch of councils, we've basically spent 4 months emailing and ringing every 2 weeks. We have canvassed and canvassed and canvassed, and it's really just through dedication. So I encourage you to go down to your local council who does deal with your waterways and ask them what they're doing in regards to it. And lastly, I'd like to leave you with this. We don't live on planet Earth. We live in planet ocean. So please, we can all get together. The plastic pollution situation can be stopped. It just needs a collective effort.
So thanks so much for your time, guys. Happy to pass over the reins to Hayley and answer any sort of questions in the meantime.
Thank you, guys. I'll hand over to Rebecca in a second to present her preso, but while she's getting that up, just want to say a big thank you for sharing your knowledge on this topic. And I think it's great that you guys are addressing it from different angles, looking at advocacy as well as stormwater management, and just getting involved in initiatives like the zero litter to ocean target and getting on board local councils. That's great. Would love to see that gain more traction, and let us know if there's anything we can share as well to get more traction with that one. So we did have a couple of questions come through, so thank you for posting those. We'll be answering them after Rebecca's presentation. If you just want to hit slideshow, Rebecca, we'll be all good to go.
Right.
Thank you.
You can all sorted. You can see my screen and everything. Looking good?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to get into it. So I'm Rebecca Van Amber. I'm from the School of Fashion and Textiles at RMIT University. And so I have quite a sort of niche perspective on the plastic issue. So I'm going to kind of take us in a slightly different and very niche direction here. So my area of expertise is really about material science with a very particular focus on textiles and fibers. And so that's kind of where I'm going to drive this conversation, is really around the issue of plastics within the fashion, textile, and clothing industries. So I have quite a short little presentation, and I'm just going to touch very briefly on some of the issues that I think are the really key issues in this industry in regards to plastic, and some of the sort of more sort of topical and sort of hot issues at the moment as well. But just a quick couple of things I'm not sure if everyone is really aware of. In terms of the global production of fibers, polyester is actually the world's most commonly produced fiber by volume. It makes up probably, depending on what source you're looking at, approximately 50 to 60% of global fiber production is polyester. So that's a lot of synthetic, petroleum-based plastic fibers that are being produced, particularly for clothing. And we can just see, you know, when we look at actual figures of the amount of polyester that's being consumed, it's just going up and up and up. And I'm sorry I don't have a graph showing that, but in terms of the amount of polyester that's being produced, it's growing every year. And certainly as the global population grows, the volume of clothing and textile and apparel products are also growing. And a big piece of that is polyester. So, you know, when you think about the fact that polyester has really only been around for, I think, well, about 70 years, you know, up until the 1930s, people were primarily wearing natural fibers only because synthetic fibers they didn't really come into sort of mass production until around 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. So prior to that, all clothing produced was natural fibers. So it's really just been in sort of last 100 years where we've seen all of these synthetic and regenerated cellulose fibers on the market, or what people are calling sort of semi-synthetic, but I don't really like that term. It's more, they're regenerated cellulose. So we're producing all of these polyester garments. Obviously, there are other fibers as well that are petroleum-based or plastic, as we want to call them in tonight's discussion. One of the big issues as well is the throwaway culture around garments. So we know that garments are being used for shorter and shorter amounts of time. We know that there are people out there that are wearing something once and then throwing it away. So obviously that is a huge problem if we're looking at materials like polyester that are going to be around for hundreds of years. We have no idea how long they are going to be in the landfill. And so it's actually a very durable material, and it's being made into a very cheap item and then worn once and then thrown away. In terms of resources, that's really not an efficient use of resources at all. So that to me is quite a scary concept, is that we're putting all of these energy, all of these resources into making something that is ending up immediately in landfill. And we have no idea how long it's going to be there, probably forever, you know, at this rate. The other big issue for me is really around packaging. So the fashion and textile supply chain is very, very long. We don't produce a lot of fashion items in Australia. We have some, but most of the garments that we're consuming in this country are being manufactured overseas, probably in Asia. So all of those garments that are coming into Australia, they're all wrapped individually in little plastic bags, as you can see in this image. Everything that comes into a shop is probably wrapped in a single bag like that. And then if it comes into a shop, it's all unpacked and then hung up. But if you're buying things online, then those plastic bags are going into more plastic bags, and then they're coming to your house. So for me, there's a huge issue around all of this packaging, which is, like I said, most garments are individually packaged, and all the packaging just gets chucked away. So that for me is a really really problematic issue. And then of course there's things like the tiny little bits of plastic on the swing tags, on the labels. You know, those are very, very small pieces of plastic, and again, you clip them off, you throw, you throw them away. They're just these little bits of plastic that are go hand in hand with the fashion industry, which I think is extremely problematic. And then, of course, we have other types of fibers beyond polyester. Obviously, nylon is another synthetic or plastic fiber, but the big one is elastane, or what a lot of people refer to as spandex or lycra. So this is a fiber that we've really seen a very high percentage of this fiber being increasingly used in fashion items, especially, when we think about things like stretchy jeans, which have probably only been on the market maybe 15 years, yoga pants, leggings, athleisure, all of these garments are only possible because of elastane. And so there's a lot of elastane in use, and elastane is one of those fibers that again, it's a synthetic fiber, so if we're mixing that with, say, cotton or some other type of fiber, maybe wool, it's going to affect how long that garment actually takes to degrade if you did want to compost it, which, how many people are composting their garments, really? And certainly, there's no way at present to recycle elastane. With some types of fibers like polyester, we actually can recycle polyester fibers, and I think there's a great case for polyester in particular to be recycled into other types of fibers and fabrics and products. But elastane, at present there's not really any technology to recycle elastane. Excuse me. And then, of course, finally, one of the other things I want to touch on is the microfiber pollution in our waterways. There's more and more research and also press that's highlighting the very large problem of these microfibers ending up in our waterways and ending up in our own bodies, but also all of our aquatic life, which is very problematic. So I'm going to get onto that a little bit more here. And the next slide. So microfiber shedding is one of the sort of topics that I think has only recently come to the forefront, sort of in the maybe last sort of 5 years or so. It's been highlighted that this is a real problem, especially in our oceans and our waterways. And so what microfiber shedding is really, it's the release of very, very small, very tiny fibers from textile and apparel products. And so there's a lot of research already sort of highlighting the negative effects of these microfibers being ingested by our marine life. And we've already touched on that in this larger scale when we're talking about whales and that sort of thing. And so one of the things, there's a couple different topics that I want to highlight here that people might not be aware of. It's actually a great paper that one of my students actually, this is an issue that one of my students brought to my attention in my one of my courses earlier this year. So thank you, Ellen. This is a shout out to you. But the microfiber and microplastic release from consumer items that are not clothing items. So this is actually plastic tea bags, those little plastic pyramid tea bags. There's a great paper talking about the release and the amount of plastic and microplastics that are released from those little tea bags when you brew a cup of tea. So as you can imagine, you have your nice little pyramid tea bag and you're brewing your tea, and then it's releasing all these microplastics, and then you're ingesting them. So you can see where possibly we would end up ingesting maybe a credit card's worth of plastic every week if we're ingesting these sorts of materials. And there's a lot of different reasons why these microplastics and microfibers are coming off of textile and apparel products. And I'm actually dipping into my own research here, which is from quite a long time ago, and it's actually not about microfibers, but it actually highlights what is happening. And so the image that I've got on the slide here is from a paper that I published about 10 years ago, which actually was looking at the laundering of silk fabrics. And in this particular research, this was for my master's, we were looking at the effect of laundering on silk fabrics and looking at the damage that was done to the fabrics by washing them at different temperatures. It was really sort of a consumer performance sort of testing. And what we were able to see, and I'm hoping that you can see this in your in your screen is that when we were looking at different temperatures, we could actually see different types of damage happening due to the laundering. And so this is the sort of, although these aren't synthetic fibers, this is the sort of damage that we're talking about. So we're looking, if you can look at your screen, maybe I can use my mouse here, you can see these little areas of basically these microfibrils they're basically peeling off the main fiber. And so you can see when you're putting a garment into the washing machine, you're laundering it, it's rubbing up against other types of fabrics and other materials. You've got your laundry powder in there. It's, especially if you have a top-loading washing machine, so it's got the center agitator, your fabric is being abraded against that agitator, which is how your fabrics are getting clean. You can see why all of this mechanical damage with water, with heat, and with detergents, you're going to have some breakdown of these materials, and basically that's why you're getting these microfibers being released, because your fibers are breaking down. So even though that paper is very old and has nothing to do with microplastics, I thought it was still a really good way to illustrate what is actually happening to these materials and why this is a problem. So luckily, there are actually, although there's a lot of research at the moment talking about microfibers and so what causes microfibers and how do we fix this? For me, it's not really rocket science. There's actually quite a lot of fundamental understanding about materials, textile materials, and how they're made, so that we could probably reduce the amount of microfibers that are being released into the environment. And I must say, caveat, like I have not published in this area, but myself, but just having a good, solid understanding of materials, material testing, and material quality is actually one of the things that can help reduce this microfiber shedding. And definitely, there's some great researchers out there that are trying to unpack this a little bit further. And so one of those is this researcher DeFalco, and so they're sort of suggesting things like using a liquid detergent instead of a powdered detergent, which I thought was great. They also have another paper where they're talking about one of the suggestions in terms of making fabrics and materials is to use yarns made of filament fiber. So these filament fiber is a long continuous fiber. Primarily, when we talk about synthetic fibers like polyester and nylon, they're typically extruded as a long single filament fiber, whereas if we're talking about a staple fiber, that's a short fiber. So most of our natural fibers are short fibers, so cotton, wool are usually these short little staple fibers. But what happens in manufacturing is that depending on the type of garment that they're producing or the type of hand feel that they're looking for in a particular fabric, manufacturers might actually make their long synthetic fibers like their polyester or their acrylic or whatever it is and cut it into short staple lengths to try and kind of, they might be mimicking a natural fiber, so they might be trying to mimic wool or cotton or kind of giving some of these materials a softer sort of hand feel. And so if they don't cut those fibers into short little fibers, if they continue to use them as a long continuous filament fiber, and especially if they put in a really high twist, you're much less likely to get these microplastics or the fibers coming off of those types of yarns. And the image that you're looking at here is kind of helps to illustrate that. So this is one of my favorite pet peeves in terms of apparel and textile quality, and that is a garment that is pilled. I hate pills. They really annoy me. There's almost nothing for me that is more frustrating than to buy or purchase a garment, wear it a few times, and find that it comes out in pills, because the understanding of the formation of pills is well understood. We know why pills are formed. We know how to avoid producing fabrics that pill, and the reason they are pilling is because manufacturers are cheaping out. They are using poor quality fabrics. They're not being tested. Basically, they're just being cheap. So, or they're trying to get a really soft hand feel because that's what they think the consumer wants. But in fact, what you're compromising when you're going for these really soft, fluffy fabrics is you're compromising apparel quality, and then you end up with these pills, and then people are probably more likely to just throw it away because it's pilled and they don't want to wear it anymore. So as you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about textiles and textile quality. I apologize if I'm nerding out and you guys are like, oh my gosh, enough with the pills. But no, I hate pills. They really annoy me, and especially because, you know, from a textile science point of view, we know how they're formed. We know how to test for them. It's a very avoidable problem, and it's one of those things that contributes to poor quality. And certainly if you have garments that are making these pills, basically what it means is that that garment is shedding fibers. And the reason that it forms a pill is because when it's shedding the fibers don't quite release. They kind of just ball up and get stuck and attached to the surface of the fabric. And this really happens quite a lot when we have fabrics that are blends, particularly if you have something like a really strong fiber and a slightly weaker fiber. What happens is the weaker fiber might break off and form the pill, but because it's got that strong fiber, the strong fiber holds it to the surface of the fabric. So pills are a great indication that your fabric is shedding microfibers into the environment. So that is obviously something that we want to avoid, and we know how to avoid it in manufacturing. It's just that our manufacturers are not doing us justice. So that's my little soapbox there. I hope you all enjoyed your mini textile science lecture today. I'm happy to answer more questions about this, but there's just a short little presentation about some of these issues. It's quite a lot of, I did a bit of research putting this presentation together, so there's a nice list of references if you want to do a little bit more reading. These are some of the papers that I thought were quite interesting and really started to kind of highlight this issue. And certainly there's a lot more work to be done here. But I think from my perspective, in terms of avoiding microplastics from textiles, it's really about bringing textile, especially textile material quality, back up. So the thing that for me is really frustrating is textile and apparel products that are really poor, low quality. And it really, a lot of times it comes down to the material choice that's being made by the designers or the manufacturers. And so for me, it's really about educating our designers, our manufacturers, our retailers about material properties so that they can then design better products. So
Rebecca, can I just jump in with a question very quickly?
Sure.
I recently bought a cashmere jumper because it was from a reputable brand, I won't name it, but it was half the price of a normal cashmere jumper, and it's pilled. So does that mean that it's just crap cashmere?
No, it means that what they've probably done is, because cashmere, when people think cashmere, they think, oh, it's really soft, it's really fine, it's really luxurious. Was it really soft and fluffy, like lovely. Felt beautiful? Yeah, exactly. So the reason, the way that they're able to get that hand feel is they're using what I would consider a low twist yarn. So the yarns, it's not twisted very tightly because it retains that fluffy feel, and so there's a lot of fibers sticking out on the outside. And so what happens is basically, it's just mechanics really. Because it's a low twist yarn, your fibers are not twisted together really tightly, and so basically the friction is not holding those fibers together, and so they're able to escape the yarn and then create these pills. So it's all very, very physical. It's really we're basically just talking about how tightly the fibers are entwined, how much friction there is between the fibers. And the problem is that people think that they like soft garments, soft hand feel, they like the fluffy sort of jumpers. If you have a higher twist yarn, you don't get that nice, sometimes you don't get that nice soft handle. And so the fabric seems stiffer, and so I think there's the perception that they're not going to sell. But what you are compromising is really quality. So you there needs to be this balance of having a yarn that has a high enough twist so that you're actually holding all of your fibers together and they're locked, but still getting kind of a nice fluffy or acceptable hand feel. And there's lots of different ways to do that, and that really just comes down to textile engineering and manufacturing and sort of trial and error, but not all manufacturers want to do that. So I'm sorry if that's happened to you. It really sucks, and it would absolutely piss me off as well.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, for your presentation. Very insightful around microfibers and the shedding of them and all of those details that I know a little bit about, but not as much as you, obviously. So just in the interest of time, we've got 10 minutes left to do our Q&A, and I've seen that some people have already posted some questions. So I'll go through a couple of those now. And I just would like to say that ones we can't address in the time slot, unless people are happy to stay on the line a bit longer, we can definitely follow up after this session. So all of your questions will be answered. So thank you for posting. So getting back to the theme of the story of plastic, I think the key messaging coming out of that's been around, we need to focus more on the, production side of plastic and the companies producing them, which turn out to be fossil fuel companies, and who knew that plastic was a byproduct of what they were sourcing. So Nikhil's got a question here. Why we are talking about waste management and advocacy around use and reduce by consumers, but how do we influence the big production companies, which are the source of all of this plastic that essentially becomes waste that we're now dealing with and talking about tonight? It's these same companies which are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, and as this movie indicates, this is where we need to be focusing our attention. So how are we starting to address this issue? I know it's a huge question to tackle, but I guess, how are we steering the conversation back to the start of the whole processing of the product?
I can try to start answering this question and leave it up to Jeremy.
All yours, mate.
Rebecca to do a much better job. But look, number one, the big business, they're very much financially motivated, and they're very good at spotting trends and understanding consumer interests and desires. And if there's a growing awareness around this plastic pollution issue, and there obviously is, the big businesses are essentially going to try to sort of, I guess, capitalize on that. But again, the power of the consumer dollar is mighty, and I think it's actually up to, I guess, us and everyone else who is aware of this issue to actually raise more awareness around this issue to drive essentially consumer change. That's my first point. The second point I'd make is I think we need to actually communicate and collaborate with big industry, big businesses. They need to recognize that they actually are part of the problem. And they're also, realistically, they're part of the solution. So giving you an example, I was at a litter summit last year with Jeremy in Sydney, and there was 2 representatives from a cigarette manufacturing company. And that was the first time they'd actually gone to one of these things. And they were there because they had an increased awareness that they were a major part of the problem. As a side note, cigarette butts are the #1 pollutant that people see in beach cleanups, etc. And that was a key message that they took away. So they know that they are part of the problem, but I think it's up to, I guess, us and others to actually try to work with them to actually develop solutions. So trying to root out this consumerism of single-use plastics, try to develop alternatives, try to, I guess, identify innovative approaches to actually essentially business as usual, because we need business as usual is not working and it needs to change.
Yeah, Brad, I like to sort of agree with you, but mate, they're not going to change until they're forced to change. So I would go to say plastic tax, go take the incentive from the oil companies to go out for the fracking. I mean, if you looked at the story of plastic, the amount of new mines they're looking at, in the next 5 years is just so scary. Now, to Brad's point, they're basing that on demand. So I think while the demand's still there, especially during COVID, when you're not supposed to use single-use items, etc., or sorry, they promote using single-use, I think we're going to do what Brad's saying, try and communicate with them, but at the same time, we're going to get a bit hard. We need money as an economy. Let's tax the big guys. I think they've got enough of it.
Definitely. I'd just like to add, I think from a consumer products perspective, those brands didn't feature at all in the film. And I mean, they talk about commitments to using recycled packaging and initiatives to invest in waste management infrastructure. But again, it's still pushing the onus on either to the consumer or at the end of the product's life cycle, rather than them saying, actually, we admit we want to sell more units year on year because we're a business and we want to make more money. But downstream, I mean, even before that, it's how can they think differently and, see more of a circular economy solution rather than just continuing to do things the way they've always done it and profit out of it quite substantially. So there should definitely be that extended producer responsibility.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think that they would feel very differently about the products that they're producing if they were the ones that had to deal with them at the end of the life cycle. Would they be producing, 15,000 different types of plastic, or would we be looking more at a system where there's only a few types of plastic so that they are more easily able to be recycled,
And they made a good point in the movie that we're, as a consumer, you're buying the product, not the packaging. So therefore that onus should be on the producers, but also I think policy needs to be a key player.
Hey, but also, and I'm quoting someone else, let's call it for what it is. Let's call it hazardous waste. It's not single use, it's hazardous waste. If you went down to buy a pump bottle and it had hazardous waste written on it, would you really want to pick it up? So I think it's important we recognise this product for what it is.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another question we've got from Stella: why are gully pits and gross pollutant traps not being properly managed by councils? I think Ocean Protect, guys. Jeremy.
Very simple. Local government have been burdened with this problem. So to give you an indication, local government are responsible for stormwater in your local area. I live here in the Northern Beaches. Local government are responsible for the maintenance of all these assets. State government are responsible for major water assets, and the Australian federal governments are responsible for the ACT, bit of the Northern Territory, but they're responsible for the ocean, so 200 kilometres out. The short answer is they're under-resourced, and really it's out of sight, out of mind. Up until 3 years ago, when social media really started hitting plastic in the ocean, stormwater, I mean, it was just one of those stupid poor cousins to wastewater. So the simple answer is there's no appetite, there's no public pressure, we're not putting enough pressure on them. They've got very little dollars to put towards it. And at the end of the day, no one's really complaining. If I put my rubbish bins out tonight, which I've got to, and if I went tomorrow morning and they weren't emptied and all the streets weren't empty, you'd go nuts. But because they're underneath the ground, they're out of sight, out of mind, there's not that public pressure.
Thank you. And another one to throw to you guys as well. Emily said it's really great to see so many councils in Queensland committing to the zero waste to ocean target. Have we seen any councils outside of this area, Queensland and New South Wales, I guess, doing anything more locally in Victoria?
Hey, Victoria, we need a couple in Victoria. Brad, I think you and I have seen hundreds of letters to Mornington Peninsula, to the City of Casey. Look, we know there's a massive problem down there, but no, unfortunately. So any help you can give us, whoever it was who asked the question, send us the link. We'll write to your council. So no, that's the short answer.
Yeah, it's disappointing, number one. But number two, we're obviously advocating for this zero litter ocean target across Australia. So that obviously includes Victoria. And look, blatantly, there's a real focus on cleanup currently in particularly Melbourne. Like they've just recently installed a whole bunch of seed bean technologies, which are great, but they're focusing on removing plastic after it's already in the bay or river environment. It's far more effective to obviously stop pollution from getting into the waterway in the first place.
Yeah, and it's a lot more glorious to go out and be Boy and Slant. Don't get me wrong, he's done an amazing job for advocating for ocean pollution. But here's a guy and spending millions and millions of dollars out in the middle of the Pacific trying to clean up the plastic. Come on, guys. I think the money's better spent trying to avoid it, like the waste management hierarchy as we promote, and to stop it getting out there in the first place.
And a question for everyone. I think since the China ban, it's sort of been, our waste industry hit rock bottom. Do you think there's been enough innovation that you've seen starting to come in terms of government funding and other initiatives that have been put forward since the China ban came into place, because it's forcing us to actually have to deal with our own waste? Or do you think it's still so complex because we have global supply chain and so many questions in one question?
Yeah. Look, my 2 cents is I don't think we've really started to feel the pain yet. I think where else are we sending it? It's talking about COVID. Everything's about COVID at the moment. We're not even talking about recycling. So there's something going on. I haven't seen it, Brad. Over to you, Rebecca.
Short answer. Very little, and it's disappointingly so. Not nearly enough has actually been done to appropriately stop plastic pollution and appropriately protect our waterways and oceans. We can find $400 billion to invest in the military, like a few more submarines, etc. But to appropriately protect our waterways and oceans, nothing. There's some token efforts around increased recycling and stuff like that. But the reality is we're still seeing the same plastic single-use items in our supermarkets, shops, etc. Very, very little has changed, but it has to change, and it has to change now.
I think one thing that COVID's highlighted as well is the need to decentralize and to be able to function at the local level, and that can be everything from how we live to, our outdoor spaces, what we eat, where it's grown, where we manufacture.
But how long for though, Hayley? You know, this is the thing. It's the dream, isn't it?
It is unrealistic to a degree, but
we just need to keep
thinking differently.
We do. Yeah.
Sorry, Rebecca, did you have anything to add to that one?
Oh, I was just going to mention, Australia really lacks a lot of infrastructure in terms of recycling. I do a lot about textile recycling because textile waste is a huge problem. It's getting worse and worse and worse. Australia is one of the biggest consumers of textiles per capita. So, and that's one of the problems that I think it's so daunting that people just can't it's just too much of a problem to sort of wrap your head around. And we're in a very different position from, say, Europe, where they've really had to deal with a lot of their waste. And, even in the film as well, they were talking about the packaging, the plastics. Packaging in Europe was very different to packaging plastics in other parts of the world. And that's because they have a lot of regulations. And I think a lot of that has to do with their population density, in that they can't just spend, throw all their waste to landfill because they don't actually have the land. So they have to actually deal with it. And so that's why I think we've seen a lot more innovation, especially around, textiles and waste and all sorts of waste management in Europe, because they just have that population density in a very small area, and they've just had to deal with it. So in my mind, they're really the leaders in this area.
Excellent. Question from Chris. Are these bioplastics, we might have time for one more and then we'll have to probably wrap up because we've just gone a little bit over time. Are these bioplastics as good an alternative as they're made out to be? Or should we be avoiding them as much as the petroleum-based plastics that we typically consume?
Who would want to go with that one?
Oh, geez. You've got to read the fine print, and I'm assuming that you've looked at or seen the story of plastic. Look, you've just got to read the fine print. That's all I can say. A lot of companies are out greenwashing, saying this and that, and it's very hard to work out.
Yeah, look, I'll give you a more straight up answer. In short, no. I think the words like eco and bio are heavily overused. They're just essentially typically greenwashing. I think that the number one thing that people should be doing is just avoiding the use of the plastic, or whatever the sort of the bioplastic might be. That is the far more effective approach than trying to rely on some fine print of some bioplastic company.
Rebecca, one last one for you. What brands would you suggest are doing it justice when it comes to producing better quality fabrics or manufactured textiles?
That's a really good question. It's really hard. There's some great manufacturers here in Australia, actually. Mariel up in Queensland, who runs Full Circle Fibres, produces a lot of locally grown cotton here in Australia, and I think that she's got a background in textile engineering, so I know that those sorts of the cotton fabrics that she's producing are very high quality and absolutely made with sustainability in mind, which is fantastic. And there's a lot of companies that are in Australia that are starting to use like Better Cotton from the Better Cotton Initiative, and a lot of recycled fabrics as well. There's a lot of designers trying to use recycled fabrics, recycled polyester and that sort of thing. But it really comes down to, like everything, as we've been saying, it's really reading the label. So not just what is in this fabric, but also where has it been produced, is one of the things that we need to be looking at when we're looking at our garment labels. And certainly there's no real magic bullet at this point. I wish I could give you a better answer than that.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I know that there's the Good On You app that you can also look at, which has brands that have been externally reviewed and looking at the sustainability of their supply chain. So really good one to get involved with if you're looking for advice. I will wrap up there, guys. I wanted to thank all the panelists for their time today. I think we've tried to cover a lot of content in an hour, so I'm sorry if it was a little bit rushed, but if you haven't seen the story of plastic, you can view it until the 3rd of August, which is just around the corner. Can't believe it's nearly August. But thank you so much for your really unique perspectives, given your areas of expertise. And I think it really broadens the conversation around the plastic issues that we've addressed and gives the audience a lot to think about. But we don't want you to feel powerless through all this. It's just, it's about the understanding of the actual issues so that we can act and, make different decisions. And I think it's a really well put together film. There is a little survey that they want us to circulate. So I will be sending a link to that, as well as a few other links to some things we've spoken about tonight. So watch out for a follow-up email. And thank you all for dialing in. Any last words, guys? All good?
I like Brad's one, hope. There's passion beats interest any day of the week. We can all band together, and this is something really we can achieve. This is not pie in the sky stuff. We can stop pollution entering our oceans.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said before, this is a big, hairy, scary problem, but it's actually one we can actually solve. And the benefits are immense when we do solve it.
My 2 cents are to put more pressure on your manufacturers and your legislators. So put pressure on the government to bring in more regulations and put pressure on the manufacturers to stop making plastics, basically, as much as you can. So
thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
See you later.
Thanks, everyone.